right now, so you can start it right now. Okay.
Cool. You got 8 minutes
to go. So last time, I don't think I was here before I did a debate. I don't think my presentation was very good. I got like 3 hours of sleep. So I'll try to make it better this time for anybody who remembers. Yeah, that was pretty bad. But here we go. So given our experience, we understand the world to be intelligible. We look for explanations wherever we find them. If I was walking in the forest one day and saw what looked to be a sorry, I think there's a bit of echo, but if I was walking in the forest one day and I saw what looked to be a clear translucent ball, something I'd never seen before, surely I would seek out some explanation for it. I wouldn't just say, oh, well, it's a brute fact, or it's just there for no reason, it just came from nothing. We seek out explanations. We look for explanations wherever we find them. And we do this for basically everything, right? So if I lose my sunglasses, if I lose my car keys, if I lose my phone, I don't just assume it's lost for no reason. I don't just assume it's a brute fact that they went missing. And I seek, and if I can't find an explanation for it, we keep looking, right? So given our experience, what do we see? Well, firstly, we observe change. We see it all around us. If I wave my hand up and down, that's a change. If I throw a golf ball up and down, that's a change. Whatever. Our experience is full of experiencing change and whatnot. As philosopher David Oderberg puts it very nicely, things go out of existence and other things come into being, and existing things lose characteristics and take on new ones. Reality is, as it were, constantly in a state of being, carved up in new and different ways. Bits of reality are constantly changing through the agencies of other bits of reality. To deny change would not only be contrary to our lived experience, but it would actually be self-refuting. For the objector, while denying change, had to move his lips. He had to reason within his mind, moving from one premise to the other. In other words, you have to undergo change in order to deny change. So it's self-refuting. So, and we can also say that change is the actualization of potential. If I move my hand up and down, my hand was potentially up, then it's potentially down. If I throw a golf ball up, it was potentially up, then it was actually up. Etc. So we observe change. Not only do we observe change, but we observe composition. Things have parts. Going back to the golf ball analogy, it has various properties. It's hard. It has a smooth surface. It has rough dimples. It's neon green. It's circular. And the ball depends on these properties for its existence. Without these properties, the thing wouldn't exist at any moment because it's actualized by those properties. So things not only change. Things are not only composite, but they're also contingent. They fail to exist. The ball could have been here, or it could have not been here. It could have failed to exist. It's not of the ball's essence to exist. If I give you a description of the ball's, everything that makes up the ball's essence, right? If I give you all the description of its physical properties or whatnot, or everything that makes it what it is, you wouldn't know whether or not it could exist, right? It's a contingent thing. So we could say that there's a distinction between a thing's essence, what it is, and its existence, that it is. And I think that's going to be very important as we go along. I think Nyklot's going to mention that in his opening statement, the distinction between essence and existence. So given that things change, they're composite, they're contingent, it raises the question, what explains these things? What causes something to change? What causes the thing's parts to come together to form the whole? What explains contingent objects? As I said before, we seek out these answers to these questions for the world to be intelligible. So at any moment, something must account for these phenomena. Something must explain change, composition, and contingency. So either the cause is going to be composite, mutable, not purely actual, has potencies, could fail to exist, or it's purely actual, it's necessary, it's simple, purely existent. It's not composed of essence and existence. Nothing has to impart existence onto it in order for it to exist, as do contingent things. And so if the cause is mutable, contingent, then we have a causal series, hierarchical causal series. I can get into that either terminates in a first member or regresses infinitely for reasons I can't go. I'm not going to go into too much because I'm running out of time. But basically, if you have a causal series, each member or of this sort, each member derives its causal power from the other member at any moment. The stick moves the stone, my hand moves the stick, and etc. And it must have something with built-in power in order for anything to have causal power at all. And this first member has to be purely actual, simple, and necessary. As Aquinas would say, et hoc omnes intelligent deum, this everyone calls God. So now we get to Nyklot. So Nyklot believes that these arguments fail based on his Schopenhauerian critiques. Now, it's helpful, and I don't want to go into too much because I know Nyklot wants to present his arguments, but it's helpful that he actually believes that the PSR is true. That's not the point of contention here, but in fact, he's actually basing his critiques off of the PSR, or at least Schopenhauer's version of the PSR, for what he believes to be an inappropriate use of these of Schopenhauer's version. So firstly, we have the PSR of being. So Schopenhauer's PSR of being, and I should also mention for background, obviously Nyklot's a transcendental idealist, so he's following Schopenhauer's philosophy. Schopenhauer's PSR states that every object has its location in space-time. So if one billiard ball hits another billiard ball, we know that these two objects are located spatially near each other. Now, what his argument is that we can't infer causality from this. All we're seeing is A and B. We can't get the noumena from the phenomena because all we're experiencing is objects in space-time. And this is essentially Hume's objection. If I see one billiard ball hit another, all I'm seeing is A, then B. I'm not seeing a causal connection between the two. Now, in contrast to Hume's causal skepticism, we do obviously observe causal interactions. When the billiard ball A hits B, we see that A might slow down upon its contact with B. Regarding causal relations, we see a dependence on a thing and its properties. For example, going back to the golf ball example, like I said, the golf ball depends on its properties in order to exist. It's made actual by its properties. We could say it goes, a thing stands to its properties as potency to act. It's made actual by its properties. Now, obviously, Nyklot is going to say, I'm not a Humean, and I know, Nyklot, you're not a Humean, you're a transcendental idealist. As I said, he would agree that our experience of causation is real. We really experience causation, but causation isn't necessarily something that's extra. It's our experience that's real, but it's not really what's going on in reality. But if causation isn't real, then it's merely an illusion. But what reason do we have for thinking this? I mean, Nyklot has to provide an argument rather than just stating it. He has to demonstrate how this is the case. Similarly, his PSR of knowing objection. Every judgment corresponds to a ground. He's going to get into that. He's going to argue that it doesn't follow that you get various categories: act, potency, essence, existence, borrowed power in the real world. But again, why not? I mean, what's your argument for thinking that it's merely illusory, these various categories? Again, he has to demonstrate this. And in fact, if he's going to argue that we can't trust our intuitions regarding
1 minute,
if Nyklot's arguing that we can't trust our intuitions regarding causation, metaphysical categories, then why should I even believe we're having this debate tonight? Maybe I'm being deceived by an evil demon into thinking that we're having this debate. After all, I can't get the noumena from the phenomena. All I'm experiencing are these sense perceptions that are being imposed onto me, space-time, the 12 categories. I structure my experience according to these. So maybe that's just what's happening. Maybe an evil demon is tricking me. As far as the PSR becoming objection, I don't really have much time, but basically, Nyklot's going to argue every event has a cause. And this only gets you causation in time. I think he's making a category error between something being simultaneous and instantaneous. I'll leave off with this. I mean, if I'm, and sorry, I know I'm short on time, so I can't really explain this as much as I want to. But basically, if I'm moving a chair, the chair it takes time for me to move the chair. It might take 10 seconds or 12 seconds or whatever, but there's no time for me between moving the chair and the chair being moved. So again, he's going to make a category error between simultaneous and instantaneous.
That is time.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you for the opening. Nyklot.
Okay, cool. I heard a lot of misunderstandings of transcendental idealism.
So real fast, remember this is going to be an opening. So whenever you're ready, let me know and I'll start your 8-minute timer for your opening.
Sure, we can go. Start.
You got 8 minutes.
Okay, so sure. Just so people know, I used to believe in these cosmological arguments. And what happened was my readings of Schopenhauer got me to reject them because I think it is a misappropriation or misuse of the PSR. And so the reason is I immediately start from experience. And when I have experience, I'm a subject knowing an object. And that object that I know is spatially extended. It has temporal duration, and I see a causal sequence of events. So for example, when I look at the tree outside, the tree has spatial extension. Also, I experience it having a duration through time. Also, I can experience me throwing an object and knocking an apple from that tree. So you would see this temporal sequence of events, which are not just Humean in the sense of I'm just associating some relation. No, I'm saying this happened because of this. The apple fell because I threw this. Now, given that that's the case, Squiddy actually has to kind of argue or prove his inflated concepts of being, because we would all agree that we experience things spatially or temporally. So what happens to him to get his cosmological argument started, he has to sit and add elements to that tree. That tree is a composite of essence and existence. Its existence doesn't come from its essence. Therefore, it has donated power. That's something he's going to have to kind of argue for, because I'm starting from more of a minimal viewpoint. I'm just starting, okay, we have experience. space, time, and causation. Second of all, as far as his argument for an essentially ordered causal series, that is misapplying the PSR of knowing to the PSR of becoming. Let me explain that. When we see causation in this world, we see one event follow another, one billiard ball strike another. So his idea of simultaneity in causation is coming from an atemporal causation. So he's stating that this tree, given that it has donated being, it has its ground in something that gives its existence. That's the structure of the PSR of knowing, that a judgment has a ground to the PSR of becoming, which is causation. So he's inappropriately using causation. So causation is a temporal sequence, and he's kind of wanting to understand that in terms of a grounding relation, which is the PSR of knowing. And second of all, the moving the chair, as far as simultaneity is concerned, you would see this is happening also temporally. When I am moving a chair, I'm exerting my muscles to move that chair, even though we can't see that sort of split millisecond in which my arm, shoulder moves my lower part of my arm, which moves that chair. That is still happening temporally. That is not happening atemporally. So my problem is atemporal causation. So we can go over that. So as far as this is concerned, I think this would be the argument that Squiddy would agree with. It's the Thomistic argument. So this particular thing exists, the tree. I'd agree with that. And then it argues in any created finite thing, there's a distinction between what is its essence and that it is an active existence. Well, that's a abstraction added to it. What we actually experience it is spatial and temporal. Whatever has existence that is not identical to its active existence does not have existence from itself. Again, it's inflating being from experience to metaphysical theories explaining the experience. Whatever does not have existence from itself must receive its existence from another, donated being. So those are, it's assuming that this object has donated being rather than just our immediate experience of it just being spatial or temporal. Then a series of beings that each receive existence cannot regress infinitely in the order of here and now dependence, an essentially ordered causal series. Well, that again is misusing the PSR of knowing. The structure of it is a ground has to have that a judgment has to have a ground for its truth to the principle of causation. Therefore, must be at least one thing that does not receive its existence, whose essence is existence, and that's God. So I would say that premises 2 to 5 in this, 2 to 4 are based upon an inflation of being from spatio and temporal relations to the concept of donated power, and premise 5 is misusing causation from understanding as a temporal series to a grounding relation. That would be it. So no, Squiddy, you have to then prove or add these concepts that we don't get from experience. Because my argument or my specific thing is, yeah, look, I start with experience. I experience things spatially, I experience things temporally, and I experience causal relations. That's it. All these other things you're adding on. Donated power. Where's donated power? Essence separate from existence. A lot of these things are not from experience, but they're theories that you're applying to explain experience. And here's the thing about this. If you want to say, well, things have donated power, why can't the atheist just say, well, things have persistence? If things have persistence, that's existential inertia. So if you just want to tack on whatever metaphysics you can, well, the atheist is just going to say that. It's going to, no, I don't see donated power. I see existence. So I'd like to actually do that if we want to. If I assume you agree with the argument, we can go through the Thomistic argument, and I can say how each premise, it's inflating being beyond what we experience, and it's understanding causation outside of what we experience as well. That would be it. Now, I'm not sure where I am, Taco, about how much minutes do I have left?
2 minutes and 40 seconds.
Okay, well, I could just get the point. So, Squiddy, if we want to now, I could actually do that. I could go through the argument, and I can say where I disagree. So, the Thomistic argument, again, this particular thing exists. The tree exists. In any created finite thing, there is a distinction between what it is, its essence, and that it is, its active existence. That's 2. 3 is whatever has an essence that is not identical to its active existence does not have existence from itself. That's premise 3. Premise 4, whatever does not have existence from itself must receive its existence from another. 4. 5, a series of beings that receive existence cannot regress infinitely in the order of here and now dependence. It's an essentially ordered causal series. 6, therefore there must be at least one being that does not receive existence, whose essence is existence, ipsum esse subsistence. 7, this being is what we called God. So the idea is there. God is going to be proven from that. Now, as an issue, I have problems with 2 through 5. 2 through 4 inflate being from spatial and temporal relations to donated power, which we don't get from experience. He tacks on experience. And premise number 5 is taking causation outside of its appropriate understanding in temporal relations to a grounding relation and atemporal causation, which again is applying concepts of the PSR of knowing to the PSR of becoming. So first thing, being, or the PSR of being, is being inflated from spatial and temporal relations to donated power, which you can't get to. And next is causation is being misunderstood as far as a temporal series of events to a grounding relation, which is the structure of the PSR of knowing. So Squiddy, I'm just going to go into I can end it now, but I assume you agree with that Thomistic argument, and then we can kind of proceed from there. But yeah, I'm done.
Thank you so much for the amazing openings, both of y'all. Now, remember, people.
Sure. Also, my coming
ready,
through better now. I got rid of my VPN.
Way
I shut
better.
that off. Okay, good. Yeah, that was the reason.
All right. Mega bloodbath engaged. You've got an hour.
Greg, go ahead. Okay, Squiddy. So as a Thomist, I assume you agree with the starting point of experience. I forgot what the Latin phrase is again, but you start with knowing and then get being from knowing. So you start from experience as well. So both me and you will start from experience, correct?
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay, so when I experience objects like the tree outside, I experience it as spatial and temporal, meaning that this is a transcendental condition necessary for it. So to have that experience, I need to experience it spatially or temporally. Now, something like donated being is not something that's essential to the experience itself. It's a metaphysical add-on. It's a theory to explain experience, but it's not part of the experience. It's going away from phenomenal experience to a metaphysical speculation about experience, right?
I'm not sure about that because we derive our understanding, these metaphysical categories, from our experience. So I don't think that'd be true, right? Like if I have my computer, right, I can know what it is, but telling me everything about what it is doesn't tell me that it is, right? So from that, given the fact that my computer is contingent, that I can know what it is without knowing that it is, that would be the distinction between essence and existence from my experience of the things in the world, right?
Yes, that is an add-on. So what's happening there is you're basically saying, oh, I have experience. I experience things spatially or temporally, and then I can have, this is where the PSR of knowing comes in, I have a representation of that representation. I can use reason to create concepts, and then I can keep abstracting those concepts and then use that to understand the fundamental experience itself. But the problem is that is coming from higher level abstractions of the original experience that you're adding on to it. The thing that we would all share, that we all have as the fundamental, is that we experience it spatially and temporally.
I'm just confused. It's like saying you don't experience the law of non-contradiction. It's like, I guess it's not like floating in front of me, but it would be self-refuting to deny it, right? And similarly, we can demonstrate things like the essence, existence, distinction, the act, potency, various metaphysical categories. We can derive that from experience, but it's not going to be like right in front of us. So I'm just not understanding your argument.
Okay, so the law of non-contradiction would be part of the PSR of knowing. It's how we have to relate judgments and concepts together. But this being the case, when I'm talking about immediate experience, we experience things spatially or temporally. So the idea is basically this. If you did not have you're not experiencing spatially or temporally, would you even have the experience of an object itself?
No, I would agree with that, but I also think that given the fact that things are contingent, that they're located within space-time, there must be a distinction between its essence and its existence. I think it follows logically.
That is a higher level of abstraction that you're using to explain the experience. That's a theoretical metaphysics. That's not part of the phenomenal experience. That's what I'm saying. It's not part of the original experience itself. Just that phenomenology of it, we don't experience it as essence and existence. That is a metaphysical layer that you add to it. That's the point that I'm trying to make. Like here, let me give an example. Do you experience donated power in that tree?
Sort of, because if the tree undergoes change, it's called. If I decide to chop down the tree, right, I have my power built in, and I donate it to the tree, and I donate it to the axe, which donates to the tree, and so on. So I derive that experience because I know that given causation is true, given that I'm causing the tree to be chopped down, the tree is being caused by me, which is being caused by or it's being caused by the axe, which is being caused by me, and so on. I understand that each member derives its causal power from the other member. So yes, I am, in a sense, getting the idea of donated power from that experience.
Okay, so what would you say when there's someone who's an atheist and says, I experience that object as having persistence and not donated power? Because what they both experience is it's spatial or temporal. Spatially or temporally. One is just saying, here's my metaphysical explanation, here's your metaphysical explanation. The whole point that I'm getting at is from the original experience itself of it being spatial or temporal. Either both of these are just kind of metaphysical tack-ons. They're metaphysical additions that you're using to explain this. So my question to you is, from the experience itself of just being spatial or temporal, how do you get to donated power or donated being versus persistence? Donated being will get you to the Thomistic concept of God. Persistence just gets you to existential inertia. Go ahead.
Yeah, from the very fact that it's within space-time, it's contingent, it could fail to exist. Its essence is not I can know what it is without knowing that it is, that things are multiplied, that things aren't eternal, and so on. These things get me to the idea of essence and existence. As far as like the atheist saying, well, things have existential inertia, well, no, because the argument demonstrates that things can't just persist in existence. They require a sustaining cause at any moment, because if something has a distinction between its essence and existence, something must impart existence onto it, and so on. If things change, if things have parts, and what have you, they require a sustaining cause. So no, again, I mean, your whole argument is just that, well, these are like metaphysical additions. I mean, I'm saying, like, so what? Unless you're denying metaphysics as a whole, yeah, I mean, my argument is that it's impossible to have. I mean, if you have contingent things, there must be a distinction between its essence and existence. I mean, I'm just not. Yeah, but
Yeah, that's my point. My point is, from our immediate phenomenal experience of space, time, and causation, these metaphysics of whether it's persistence to get to inertia or whether it's donated power to get to God can't be obtained from that experience itself. There's just going to be, let's say, abstractions added on. Because let me give you an example. A lot of times people will use the concept of donated power as this. Oh, my monitor is being held up by my desk. My desk is being held up by my floor. My floor is being held up by the ground. And by analogy, things are being held in being. Yeah, that's an analogy, but what it actually is are spatial relations. That's what it is. What we actually experience is spatial relations. These additional metaphors and analogies are just abstractions after the fact. And what I'm saying is that the person who's the atheist could just sit there and as equally say, oh, I have persistence, therefore existential inertia. You sit there and you say you have donated power, therefore God.
let me ask you, when I experience causality, is there actually causality in the real world, or is it just my experience of it?
Oh, actually, as far since it's transcendental idealist, what is transcendentally ideal is also empirically real. So we are actually experiencing, causation as far as a temporal sequence. So when I sit there, it's the idea of what Schopenhauer would give. Oh, I hear a door. I hear a noise. The door slammed. The noise happened because the door slammed. It's just a way that we have to structure or understand experience. It's just this is not necessarily the way that things are in themselves. That would be it. Yeah.
Yeah, so you don't actually believe in causality in the real. You don't believe that things really or possibly really aren't being caused. It could just be an illusion, right?
Well, I mean, this depends on how you want to define illusion. I mean, if things are empirically real, then they are real. They're just not transcendentally real. So we do experience things structured through space, time, and causation. This is empirically real. It's just not transcendentally real, meaning this is not necessarily the way things are in themselves. That would be the idea. And I think this is
Yeah, so
actually a modest Go ahead.
maybe the evil demon is feeding you information, making you think causality is real, and your mind is just structuring it according to space, time, and the 12 categories. How can you rule that out?
I guess under transcendental idealism, that's really a moot point because I'm not trying. Okay, so that would assume transcendental realism, which is the idea that I have a content in my consciousness and it has to correspond to some mind independent reality. That's not what it is. I immediately have experience and experience is spatial, temporal, and causal. And then, therefore, from that, I have a judgment. So what happens is that I make a judgment from what I'm seeing here, and I say, have a concept red, a concept cup. I have the judgment, the cup is red, and that, given the PSR of knowing, is grounded because it's part of the PSR of being and becoming. It's part of that spatio-temporal reality, and that's what makes it true. I don't have to have it correspond to this mind-independent reality. I think that's why transcendental idealism completely solves these skeptical problems.
Well, I mean, folks, he just said it. So it doesn't correspond to a mind-independent reality. When I'm seeing A, then B, it's just my mind structuring it in that way according to space, time, and the 12 categories. I'm not really, I'm observing. I know you're saying you're observing it as real, but it's just A, then B. It's one event after the other. Okay, but then maybe, I mean, once again, if it's not, it doesn't correspond to a mind-dependent reality, then you could just be deceived. Maybe you're not actually experiencing it. Maybe, again, maybe an evil demon is just tricking you. My point is, if you're going to argue against me and say, well, you're not getting borrowed power from this, you're not seeing, where are you seeing the causality? That could say, I could say the same thing. Where are you observe? I mean, all you're really, maybe you're not, maybe you're in the matrix right now, or maybe an evil demon is just making you think that I'm talking to you, because it doesn't correspond to a mind-dependent reality, or a mind-independent reality, I should say. I mean, it's the same thing.
But how is this really relevant? Because the point we're trying to get at is whether or not cosmological arguments work. And all I'm saying is, given experience, what we start from, even if you want to sit there and say transcendental idealism can't know the noumena, I kind of go more to Schopenhauer to Kant to that, but still from experience itself, from what we got from experience, space, time, and causation, these arguments don't work. You have to get beyond our experience to metaphysical principles that you use to explain experience. That's my whole point. These metaphysical principles that you get of, oh, here, this thing has an essence separate from its existence. Its essence, does not give it existence. Therefore, it must receive its existence from another. That's all this package of donated power. That's just not something you get from experience. That's all I'm saying, is that you would have to just admit this is some sort of metaphysical add-on that does not come from experience. That would be it.
Well, firstly, you said, well, how is this relevant about the evil demon? My point is that this is a reductio against your position. You're telling me that you don't experience causality because it's not necessarily corresponding to a mind-dependent reality or a mind-independent reality. All you're seeing is an A, then B. My point is that that's absurd, because we're going to push that reasoning further. You'd have to say there's an evil demon, which makes you prone to skepticism, which wouldn't even, I mean, that's my point. It's reductio. But secondly, you keep saying these are metaphysical add-ons. I mean, okay, I'm just going to grant that. I mean, so what? It just sounds kind of like in a sort of like an empiricist sort of, we can only, like, there's no, like, as in we can't have, sort of it seems like you're just throwing out metaphysics altogether. I mean, I just don't see the point about the whole metaphysical add-on. The point is, I can demonstrate why things are composed of essence and existence. I can demonstrate why all of these various metaphysical categories that I'm appealing to. So calling it a metaphysical add-on, I just think is kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It's a non sequitur. Yeah, there we go. I think it's just a non sequitur. I mean,
yeah, but it's not obtained from experience. Okay, so what I'm basically saying is this: when we start out from experience of space, time, and causation, these principles that you have can't be derived from it. So, for example, space and time, given the principle of PSR of being, which is spatial and temporal relations, that does not get donated power from that. Given the PSR of becoming, which is causation that's temporal, that does not get us to an essentially ordered causal series. An essentially ordered causal series has to come from applying the structure of the PSR of knowing, which a judgment has a ground, that grounding relation to causation, and then having this essentially ordered causal series, which is not the way we experience causation, which is part of a temporal sequence. That's the whole idea. You cannot derive this from experience. You just have to add this on. And all I'm saying is, if you want to do that, then all you're going to say is that the atheist will sit there and say, oh, well, hey, great. You know what? I'm just going to say that, no, this doesn't have donated power. This has persistence. That's it. And given persistence, you have existential inertia. So I'm going to ask you a question. Given our experience of space, time, and causation, or let's just say the principle being, because we're talking being here, the PSR of being, how do you get to donated power versus persistence just from experiencing its spatial or temporal properties?
Well, very simple, because if I assume that this thing really exists in some mind-independent reality, then I know we can at least conceptually distinguish between what it is and that it is. And we know that this is a real distinction, because I can know everything about the thing in reality, and yet it could fail to, or I can know everything about it in reality, and yet that won't tell me whether or not it exists. I know there's a real distinction between its essence and existence because it can be multiplied, and so on, right? But the whole thing, I mean, I think your whole thing is just that your argument just hinges on the fact that we're not experiencing things as we are, because if there's a real distinction between, if a thing really exists and it really has, and if a thing really exists, I can demonstrate how there's a real distinction between its essence and existence. If that's true, it requires a cause to impart existence onto it. And if that's true, if things are really causing one thing after another and so on, then it's not just our experience of it. Then that is borrowed power, right? So that is my demonstration. If things really are as they are, I've demonstrated how there's a distinction between its essence and existence. And if things are really caused and so on, then there must be something which imparts existence onto it and so on. So that's it, right? Borrowed power, essence, and existence. I just demonstrated it.
No, you didn't. So let's actually kind of, not from the standard I asked you, from experience itself. So even let's take, I believe, something that Facer gave, the example of the monitor held up by the desk, held up by the floor, held up by the ground. So even when he wants to really explain this donated being, he is explaining it originally in spatial relations, because that is the immediate experience we have. We have an experience of spatial relations. And so what I'm saying is he's taking this experience and he's saying, oh, well, the monitor is being held up by my desk, so something has to be held up in being. He's applying an abstraction or an analogy to get to that donated power. Understand how he's getting to it. I'm just saying that this is not something that you obtain that's part essential to the experience itself. It's just an abstraction after the fact. And if that's the case, I do ask you, so from that, why or how do you, from just purely spatial or temporal, just that's it, from the PSR being spatial or temporal relations, how would you get to something like donated power versus persistence?
So you're assuming that we don't experience things as they are, just from spatial temporal relations that we're experiencing, right?
I'm saying we experience things of having spatial extension, temporal duration, and causation. So, for example, when I see, for example, someone slam a door and the door made a noise, and I believe that was the reason why it made a noise. A door made a noise. So here we have something that's spatial, a door. It's temporal, it's persisting throughout time, and someone slammed the door, which then was the reason that it made a noise. So this is how we structure that experience.
Okay, is there a real, in reality, not just the way you're perceiving it, is there a real causal relation between someone slamming the door and the door making the noise?
Given the transcendental idealist framework, it is empirically real, because this idea of space-time and causation is kind of how you would understand things scientifically. So you would sit there and understanding that is going to explain as to why this sound comes about when the door is slammed. So you can go further into kind of creating these kind of scientific explanations as to why that happens. That would be it.
Well, that's not what I'm asking. I'm not asking if it's empirically real. I understand your experience of it is real, but again, as you said, it's not corresponding to a mind independent reality. I think that's where we're getting at. Would you at least grant that if it's corresponding to a mind independent reality, then yes, we do get these categories. We do get these real categories. It's not just merely our experience. I mean, would you at least? All I'm saying is that if I think that's the problem is if we're experiencing things as they are, not merely it's not merely our experience of it, then I think we do get essence, existence, borrowed power, etc. from what I've mentioned so far.
No, I would actually say the opposite. So I would actually agree with Schopenhauer in this, in that if I am understanding things phenomenally, then it's mediated. Things are mediated through space, time, and causation. You're adding additional abstractions on it, donated being and all this stuff. So you have this thick layer of concepts or abstractions. If anything, I would think the noumena would be approached by the way Schopenhauer understood it, by just this immediacy of the will. It would be something that doesn't go through this extremely thick conceptual schema. So you're not just taking, okay, so this first experience we have is things are spatial, things are temporal, and causation. You're taking that and then you're loading a lot more concepts on that, which basically are not part of that first experience, but it's just part of your metaphysical system on how to understand things. And that's what I would say is unjustified. It's the whole entire abstraction that you have. And as I said, again, someone else could sit there and say that, I don't know, let's say like a Joe Schmidt, the Majesty of Reason guy. Oh, well, I experience things spatially, temporally, and causally as well, but this tree just has persistence. Therefore, it has existential inertia. It's not going to have this donated being. Therefore, there has to be this being whose essence is existence that provides it existence. So, no, that would, yeah, I'll just end it with that.
Yeah, I mean, it almost sounds like you're kind of presenting like a nominalist view. Like you're saying that, I mean, it just that's kind of what it sounds like to me. But again, I mean, I think we're kind of going in circles. As I've said, I can demonstrate why things persist in existence. I can demonstrate from our experience why things have a distinction between essence and existence, and why all of those various categories. I actually want to get in though into the argument.
Okay, we can actually do that. Okay, so real quickly, just from my experience or the experience of spatial and temporal relations, that alone, just geometric and arithmetic, that alone, get me a donated being.
That alone, no, you'd have to have causation, like not just experience of it, but
okay, you have to have causation. Great.
right.
So let's then go to the. So you said you can't get that from the PSR being. You just conceded that point. Let's go to the PSR becoming. Causation is a temporal series of events. One billiard ball strikes another. When we experience causation, it happens in time. Correct?
Yes.
Can you show me an atemporal causation?
No, I don't believe in atemporal causation. So you're conflating something being simultaneous with something being instantaneous. So,
well, whatever term you want to use, can you then present, let's just say something that was a conditioning factor, where X is a cause of its being, not a cause of becoming. So usually causation we experience is something that's happening temporally. You're taking causation. So for your essentially ordered causal series, for a cause of being, that causation is not happening within time, correct?
No, it is happening within time.
Okay, that causation, so there's a temporal sequence. You're saying God is cause something in time. So God giving the something existence is temporal, because the way I always understood an essentially ordered causal series, it's a cause of its being. It's not a cause of its origination. So for example, when a builder builds a house, he's a cause of its origination, which basically means it's a temporal cause. He caused that building to exist. Now, the fact that the building is in being, it's being let's say, given existence at all moments, and that's God doing it. So God just didn't do that at one point in time and not another. Like one billiard ball strikes another, he's constantly being. And so that's something that doesn't depend on a temporal series.
No, I mean, I believe that God can produce effects within time, right? He can, obviously God can, I wouldn't say, I don't want to say God acts within time, so to speak, because that would imply that God is in time. But again, he can produce effects within time. And going back to, I mean, the whole thing about atemporal causation, again, I don't believe that things are atemporal. Well, I believe that God is atemporal and he can cause things within time, but I believe that the event occurs within time. That's why I made the distinction between simultaneous and instantaneous. If I move the chair, right, the chair is me moving the chair is simultaneous with the chair being moved, but the event takes time. It could take 5 seconds, 10 seconds, however long it may take. So the point is that all causation occurs within time. All the causal effects occur within time. The event occurs in time, but it doesn't happen in an instance. It doesn't happen. So it doesn't happen in an instant, but the cause and effect act simultaneously with one another because they're part of the same event.
Okay, so let me kind of help explain this. So I'm sure you, as a Aristotelian Thomist, are familiar with the difference between an accidentally and essentially ordered causal series.
Yeah,
what Avicena would call a cause of origination versus a cause of being. So the example I gave, a builder builds a house. He's the cause of the origination of the house, but the being of the house doesn't depend upon him. This is something that's happening within a temporal series.
Yeah, that's
yes, but that's the point. An essentially ordered causal series doesn't have that. It's not a cause of its origination, because if something has a cause of its origination, that happened in time. A cause of its being doesn't depend upon it happening at this time versus that time, because at all moments it's being quote unquote held in being. It's being given existence by God. So the idea, because if you think about it, if causation was just temporal, it would be all accidentally ordered causal series, which just would regress. For you to have, well,
no, it doesn't follow.
So, Okay, so let me ask you a question. Let's think about it. Could you have an infinite series? You could have, in a sense, billiard balls keep striking each other. You just could have one billiard ball hit another billiard ball hit another bill. Okay, but see, so the issue is not, again, the cause of its origination, why it moved. Oh, this moved because one billiard ball struck another. With an essentially ordered causal series, it's more about the fact that the billiard ball itself exists, that its existence at all times is being given by God. That's the idea behind it. And so what I'm saying is, this is the point, that what you're doing, so you admitted that you couldn't do it from the PSR of being. So what you're doing here is, this is the smuggle, and I'll have everybody watch this. The PSR of knowing, how I know things, I have a judgment that corresponds to a ground. That structure is being applied to the PSR of becoming, which is causation. So whereas causation is normally one billiard ball striking another, you're now understanding causation in terms of a grounding relation, that basically this object exists because it's grounded in something else. So you're thinking, oh, well, here I have a laptop. The laptop requires power. Here's a power cord. Well, a power cord can transmit power. It can't generate it. I can't have an infinite series of power cords. Therefore, I have to have this battery, which can able to generate power. And you're just doing the same thing for God, which is, okay, God is this being whose essence is existence. So he's providing existence to everything else. You see, that is more of the structure of the PSR of knowing, a grounding relation and not a temporal series, correct?
I mean, I kind of see where you're coming from, but the point is that, for example, like the stick with the stone analogy, right? I move the stick with my hand. I move the stick. I move the stone with the stick, which is further moved by my hand, which is in turn moved by something. It requires something built in. So at any moment during that event, there's something which explains why the stone is moving, and the stone is causally explained by the hand, by the stick, which is causally explained by the hand, which is explained by my mind. And there's something that requires power built in. So whereas with an accidentally ordered causal series, they're not part of the same event. So one can occur after the other, and it doesn't need something to sustain its existence or sustain it doesn't need something to sustain its existence or cause it to change, because it has power built in. If I turn on my air conditioner, I don't need to be there in order for it to emit cool air. If I have a son, I don't need to be there for him to have a son, and so on, right? Because each member doesn't have its power, or each member has power built in. It doesn't need to derive it from the other member. Whereas I
understand the splitting.
Yeah, I'm saying that the whole thing is, in a essentially ordered series, each member has its power derivatively, and so
grounding relation. It's being grounded, right? So its power is like the example I gave. Okay, laptop receiving power from power cord. Power cords can't be infinite because they can't generate power. They can just transmit it. There has to be something which has the ability to generate power. Therefore, you have a battery. Applying that to God, God is such that his essence is existence. He can kind of give this existence to everything else. All these things in the world are a composite of essence and existence. Therefore, their existence is not part of their essence. Existence must be superadded. That's more of a grounding relation.
Sure, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you're applying the structure of the PSR of knowing to the PSR of becoming. So first of all, you admitted that basically you can't get from the PSR of being donated power. You said causation, but then now what we've shown is exactly, you've shown that you've agreed with this. You're taking the structure of the PSR of knowing, which is formal, which is how a judgment is grounded, and you're applying that to reinterpret causation outside of its proper context, which is temporal, to grounding relations. Yeah, this is my point, that this is exactly what you have to do to get them to work. You have to inflate being beyond what we know, spatial and temporal relations, to donated power. Then you have to misuse causation, which is a temporal series. You have to reinterpret it according to the PSR of knowing, which is grounding relations. And then from that, oh, well, this thing has existence. Its existence must be given by something else. You can't have an infinite series. You have this being whose essence is existence, which is providing existence. Yeah, sure. But I think basically that's it. It's a misuse of the PSR. And that's what I'm going to say. That's what I'm saying. It seems like you agreed with me.
Your PSR becoming is every event has a cause, right? Would you accept that? The PSR becoming?
Well, when we see something, we don't just experience one after another. This happened because of this.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
The sound happened because the door was slammed. That's it. That's the experience.
Right. And so at any moment, there's something which explains why the event occurs, right? So in the case of this person slamming, at any moment during that series, there's something that explains why the door is being slammed. Is that
The
correct?
door, well, the door was being slammed because we would say because person A pushed the door. That
Right,
could be
exactly.
all.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay,
That's all we need.
yeah,
That's
great.
all I need. And so at any moment of that series, there's something which explains, namely the person, right? Now at T1, we can say T1 or whatever you want to say, but I'll just say T1. If the person's pushing the door at T1, there's something which explains why the door is being pushed. Then there's something that needs to explain what causes the person to change, and so on. And either that regresses infinitely, or it terminates in a first member. That's all I need to get the argument going. And you've conceded at least
No,
that
here it is. But so this exactly the principle of the PSR becoming causation can and does regress infinitely. All that is one billiard ball striking another, striking another, striking another. The PSR of knowing, which is a judgment as its ground, cannot regress infinitely. It's the idea that something has to have a ground, and once it has that ground, it ends there. All I'm saying is you're taking that principle, you're taking that PSR of knowing, that structure, and applying it to causation. That's what you're doing. You're saying, okay, so this thing has to be grounded in this. Its existence has to be given to this. So in the same way, I'm thinking, okay, the truth of this judgment, how do I ground the truth of this judgment? Well, here's this object in front of me, the red cup. I have concept red, concept cup, judgment, the cup is red. It corresponds to this. That grounds it. That's the structure of it.
Yeah, I think
that is what you're applying to. That's what you're applying to causation. That's what I'm saying. It's a misuse of it. You're applying the structure of the PSR of knowing to the PSR becoming. So those things stand. That was number one. You're inflating being. You even admitted that from being itself, as far as spatial and temporal relations, you can't get donated power. So let's go to number two. From the principle of causation, as it's understood in the Schopenhauerian metaphysics, this system, it is just, again, temporal events. It's happening within time. Oh, well, this happened because someone slammed the door, or the sound happened because of this. We're seeing this happening temporally. You have to have the structure of the PSR of knowing applied to the PSR becoming, correct?
I mean, I wouldn't put it like that. I would just say it's the principle of causality, as you would say, the PSR becoming. And nothing goes from potency to act except by something in act. Everything that changes requires a changer. I would put it like that. But yes, and again, we get that follow, and the whole thing about we are experiencing temporal events, but I can demonstrate from that temporal event why there needs to be a first cause, because again, each member of that series has its power derivatively at any moment, and so that must terminate in a first member. So
Yeah,
number
Squiddy.
Stupid, because again, you could just say that about you could say that you're being deceived by an evil demon. All you're experiencing is the space-time relations that the demon is feeding you. That was my reductio against that point. And again, as for the PSR becoming objection, again, the whole thing about we're experiencing temporal relations. Yeah, we are experiencing things within time. I grant that. That's not a defeater for my position. I've already explained the distinction.
Okay, but here, let's go to this. So we'll go step by step. So the PSR of being, spatial temporal relations. So you've agreed that we can't go from spatial and temporal relations to donated power. You think that, but your issue with that is skepticism. So here would be my question. Okay, so here's a problem that transcendental idealists would give to transcendental realist. Okay, so you do understand that there's going to be atheists out there that do not adhere to donated power. They think persistence. They would just say, okay, as time T1, it persists, and it just might go out at T2. And then from persistence, they get existential inertia, just as you from donated power. Okay, so here's the issue. From just what's necessary, this is the point of transcendental idealism, from what's necessary for experience itself. We require space and time for experience. These things like donated power or persistence are not necessary for experience. That's the move from what's phenomenal to metaphysical. And the problem is, I think that's where the leap comes in. You would just have to admit somehow you believe that you are just understanding some deeper metaphysical layer of reality. You're getting under the hood correctly. Whereas, for example, someone who's the atheist who believes in existential inertia and persistence isn't.
Yes, because if things are real, if I'm experiencing things within my independent reality, those categories follow, as I've already said. And if that's true, things can't have existential inertia because they don't persist on their own. They require a sustaining cause at any moment. I've already said that.
Okay, why do they require? They require a sustaining cause because you're starting with the concept of donated power, right?
No, I'm showing that from my experience of the real world.
Okay, so let's go to but from experience, what are the transcendental conditions necessary for that are space and time and causation. From those, and causation understood from experience, which is temporal, you can't get donated power. From the
No, of course you can. You can.
Okay,
okay.
From space time and causation as experienced. The way that we experience causation is one billiard ball striking another. Why did that billiard ball move? Because the other struck it. Where is this power in that experience?
Well, the billiard ball striking another, that wouldn't. That would be a little bit. I mean, so in that example, that would be like more of an accidentally ordered series where once the ball hits, it can move on its own. It doesn't need a sustaining cause. I mean, that would be a little bit of a difficult example. I would use something more like the stick moving the stone or something.
Okay,
which is a bit easier to grasp.
Okay, so let's go into that.
You could have one member. You could have one member driving its causal power from the other, and so on. Right, where the stick moves the stone. If you took away the stick, if you took away the hand, or you wouldn't have. I mean, you wouldn't if you took away the mind of the person moving the stick with the stone. Then you wouldn't have any causal power at all. That would be the analogy I use at any moment of the series is driving its causal power.
Okay, so let's kind of look into that. So we have one billiard ball striking another. That is actually the same as me moving a stone with a stick. The only difference is that I'm holding the stick. So when you see one billiard ball hitting another and moving, you're actually able to see that separation in time because, that's the case. It's just what's happening when I'm moving a stone with a stick. It is so instantaneously in the sense of my muscle movements are triggering down, and there is a causal relation moving that. It isn't me somehow having this, let's just say, power of motion, and then I have this active potency of motion, and the stick has the passive potency of it, and I'm just bestowing this motion upon it, and this motion goes on the stone. Again, that's just like donated power. Those are metaphysical add-ons that are not part of original experience itself.
I mean, I've already said that it's demonstrable from the experience. If I'm moving the stick from the stone, the stone it goes from a state of potency to a state of act when I push it, and that's being further moved by the stick further being moved by my hand, which is being actualized by my mind, and so on. What you're getting that from experience. The stick derives its causal power from my hand. The hand derives its causal power from my mind. I mean, I don't see how you're saying we don't get donated power from that experience.
Oh, well,
each member's
okay. I see your problem. So what you're doing is another thing that Schopenhauer would say a mistake. So I have, as a human, motives. So there's reasons why I do things, motives. So what you're doing is you're wanting to understand that I have motives, the stick doesn't. And from that, you're taking concepts of motives and understanding that as I can kind of bestow power, whereas the stick can't. No, it's still part of a call. So this again, it's you're meshing in concepts of the PSR together, where you have the PSR of willing, which deals with motives, and then the PSR becoming, which deals with causation. But the reality of the situation, me moving the stone with a stick, this is still happening temporally. This is still me doing it.
I agree.
Okay, and it's really not very much different from one billiard ball striking another. It's still the same thing. There's a causal series. So that's the one you said you'd have a hard time doing it. So I'd ask you, explain how your metaphysics is necessary for the billiard ball striking another. Because I'm saying that's all the case. I'm saying the stick to the stone example is really no different from the billiard ball striking another.
I'll just put it like this. I'll just put it like this. So when the billiard ball moves the other ball, at any moment during the given change, right, at any moment, T1, T2, whatever moment, there requires to be a cause of that change, given your PSR becoming. So there has to be a cause of that change at any given moment. Either that cause is purely actual or itself has potential, and from there, so on, the infinite regress, and there must be a first member, and so on, right?
Yeah. Well,
There we go. That's
you
I
went on the
just
problem with
demonstrated
that.
it
No,
from
here's okay. So you're baking in this Aristotelian. Okay, so we move from donated power to now act and potency. You're really still having these metaphysical add-ons. So what's actually happening when it's moving, we can understand it, PSR being and becoming. So this ball was occupying this relation in space. At this time later, it occupies this relation in space. So we can understand everything through space and time and causation. That's it. This thing of like act and potency, these are going to be metaphysical add-ons. It's the same thing that we were talking about as far as donated power. So a lot of this, to get your metaphysics started, you have to just kind of posit these metaphysical principles, again, that you don't really get from experience, that you can get, that you add on to it. So we can do that again. So from the things I was talking about, Squiddy, space, time, and causation, as I understand it in this transcendental idealist perspective, can you get your act potency metaphysics from that?
From causation, yes, because one thing caused at any moment of any cause, there must be something which explains the cause, and something, each member derives its causal power from the other member. However way you want to put it, if something changes, if there's things have parts, etc., there must be something which accounts for that, given causation. And so each member causes the other. That can't regress infinitely. You must have a first member. I just proved
It can
from
regress.
given causation.
Okay, no, here's the thing. From the principle of PSR becoming or causation, it can regress infinitely. Because here's the thing, according to that, all series are accidental series. So let me give an example. So usually, even in scholastic ideas, even Aquinas will say an accidentally ordered causal series can be infinite, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, it's an essentially ordered causal series. Well, that's the whole point. The way Schopenhauer's understanding causation, all series are accidental. That's the point. All of it is one billiard ball striking another. The essentially ordered causal series comes from how you apply the PSR of knowing, not the PSR of becoming. The PSR of becoming or causation is the structure of accidentally ordered. It's the PSR of knowing that a judgment has a ground. This has more of the structure of an essentially ordered. But that's only that a judgment is true based upon it having a sufficient ground. That's the thing. For you to get that essentially ordered, you have to apply that structure to causation, which that's the illicit move. That's the point.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Any causation, any causal series or any causation which occurs involves an essentially ordered causal series. Why? Because at any moment during that cause, there requires something which causes the other thing at any moment. Whatever event, whatever example you want to give, the billiard ball in some way, the stick moving the stone, the chair moving, any example I give, there's going to be one cause which depends on the other cause at any moment, right? If I get any example you want to give, it has to, right?
Okay.
Otherwise you're getting, it violates even your own PSR.
No, it doesn't.
Becoming. Every event has a cause.
No, it doesn't, because okay, so the PSR,
okay, but then,
because I told you the PSR of becoming is like an accidentally ordered causal series. It's like the billiard ball striking another. One billiard ball struck another, struck another, struck another. It isn't like something has to be constantly moving the billiard ball. So the essentially ordered causal series is not a cause of origination. It's a cause of being.
Okay, let me just.
That's the idea. Okay,
let's make it easier.
So
right?
so hold on, just to understand this. So you would understand, to go back to kind of Avicenna in this. The PSR of becoming for Schopenhauer, causation, is understood more as a cause of origination. This person built this house. He was the cause of building the house. It's the cause of its origination, not the cause of its being. So let me ask you a question. If you only understand causes as cause of origination and not cause of being, will you have an essentially ordered causal series? Yes or no?
Yes. Whatever you mean by that.
Okay, so
my point is just that
Squiddy,
you agree causation occurs, right?
Squiddy, let's go to this. Okay. So do you understand the difference between cause of origination and cause of being for Avicenna?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
I suppose so. I mean, you're saying like the cause of origination, the builder builds a house, and then he's the originator of the house, whereas cause of being, God imparts existence.
Okay, so for causes of origination, they are accidentally ordered causal series, right?
Causes of origination?
Yes.
They're essentially
no,
ordered?
they're accidentally. They're accident. So
yeah.
Cause of origination is one
sure,
a builder builds a house is accidentally ordered.
No. My point is that any causation that occurs, cause of origin, whatever causation occurs must involve an essentially ordered causal series. That's my point.
Okay, no, here, hold on. But
you want to?
no, you're okay. So here it is. Let's go into this. So the cause of its origin, that's the cause of being, which is essentially ordered. It's the fact that it has being in some way, whether it's a mix of act and potency, whether it is unified, or whether it gives existence.
Yes.
But that's not a cause of its origination then, Squiddy. The cause of its origination is basically temporal. It is the builder took these parts of lumber and all this stuff and used it to build the house. The builder can leave and the house is still in existence. So the house being a house doesn't depend upon the builder holding it together. That you see a series of temporal events that,
okay, at any moment, okay, if you're going to answer, at any moment when the builder built the house, is there something to account for the change, composition, whatever? No, I'm not. I'm using your PSR. I'm going by your PSR becoming. So I'm using your PSR becoming. At any moment during any given causation event, is there something which explains why the causation occurs? There's some cause. Is yes or no?
Yeah, one billiard ball moved because the other hit it. There you go.
At any moment during that cause, there's something which accounts for that change, right?
It happened because the billiard ball struck it. Yes.
I'm talking. Yeah, at any moment. So if it's true that at any moment there's something which accounts for it being changed, there we go. Because then it can't regress infinitely. It must terminate a first member.
Oh my God, you're smuggling. You're smuggling change in an Aristotelian point of view. Change, according to this, is in time. All change is just one billiard ball striking another and causing it to move. It's not this act potency metaphysics. That's not in there.
I didn't say anything about act potency.
Okay, but then what? Okay, but it can regress in. But here it is. Okay, so this rests on it. Okay, so let me ask you a question. According to this view, okay, according to the way that Schopenhauer would understand the PSR becoming, would you agree that knowing this, all series is accidental? There is nothing like an essentially ordered causal series. That would be more the PSR of knowing. Do you get that right away?
Did you say according to the PSR of being?
Okay, no. Given the Schopenhauerian analysis I gave, the PSR of becoming, okay, that would be an accidentally ordered causal series. There is no essentially ordered causal series in the PSR of becoming.
No, I don't agree.
Then you don't understand Schopenhauer, because that is what it is. The PSR becoming, that's my whole point. The PSR of becoming is that. The PSR of becoming is just a temporal series. One billiard ball strikes another. My whole point is when you're getting to these grounding relations, you're going to the PSR of knowing, which is a judgment has its ground, and you're understanding these things as requiring a ground for their existence, a ground for why they're unified, a ground for why they're a mix of act and potency. That's my point, and I'm saying that's illicit, that move.
No, first of all, I'm not smuggling in any metaphysical categories. I'm going by your PSR of becoming. And I'm saying, given any change, if we want to go with the billiard ball, fine. I'm saying, if you say billiard ball A hits billiard ball B, and there's some change occurring, there's some causation occurring for no matter how long, could be like a millisecond, 0.5 seconds, whatever. At any moment of that causation, of that change, there is something which accounts for that change. Given the PSR becoming, which is every event has a cause. If there's some change, there must be some cause. You would agree every change has a change.
Okay.
Right? Everything that changes requires something to change it. That gets you to a first member.
No, it doesn't get you to first member. Because here's the thing. Because since it's known more an accidentally ordered causal series, what's the problem in saying I got a billiard ball that hits a billiard ball, that hits a billiard ball, that hits a billiard ball, and it goes on ad infinitum? What is the problem with that?
If you're thinking about it in terms of well, if you're thinking about it at any moment, then, and again, I'm saying, I'm not saying it happens in an instant. Again, I grant that it's not instantaneous, but my point is, if you're thinking about it at any moment, whenever the change is occurring, no matter how, it could have happened for 5 seconds, it could have happened for 0.5 seconds. Again, the billiard ball example is a bit, I could still use it, but it's
okay. So let's go.
That's why I like to use the stick versus the stone.
Okay, so let's go into this. So here's the point. The difference between the billiard ball example and the one that people use for an essentially ordered causal series, it is when people are saying, look, I don't have a problem with the laptop with an infinite amount of power cords. but it's not the question of the infinite series, which is the problem. It's the question that power cords can't generate electricity. So there has to be a battery as the first member. So within that framework, the problem, you would agree, the problem is not an infinite series. The problem is that it is in the nature of the power cord such that it can't generate, it can only transmit, correct?
Yes, and I can apply that to causality as well,
But that's,
because if causality I can apply that to causality, yes.
but then that's not
not- it would be
causality
very
how the
unfair to define it
transcendental
as
idealist understands it. The transcendental idealist doesn't understand causality in that's the whole point I'm saying. The way that causality is
I'm saying that
understood,
follows
the way
given
the
what
way
I'm
that
saying.
causality is understood in the PSR becoming, that's all it is just a temporal series, like the billiard ball striking another. The grounding relation that you're talking about, that's more of the structure of the PSR of knowing that a judgment has a ground. That's the point. You are taking that structure and you're using it to reinterpret causation. That's it. So, okay, I'm just, I mean, I guess we're kind of talking in circles, but I think what I demonstrated very well, you agreed earlier on that you can't get donated power from spatial or temporal relations. The next one is, and I think you're kind of reticent for that, but you would, because any scholastic is going to agree with essentially an accidentally ordered causal series. And even them are going to agree that an accidentally ordered causal series can be infinite.
Can regress infinitely,
Yes.
yeah.
But okay,
Yeah.
but the PSR of becoming or causation for Schopenhauer is structured as if it is an accidentally ordered causal series, because an essentially ordered causal series is not a cause of something's origination, to quote Avicenna, it's a cause of its being, correct?
It's not a essentially in an accidentally ordered causal series. Yeah, sure. It's not like if I give birth to I can't give birth. If my wife gives birth to a child, right? That's its origination, and I don't need to be there in order for it to go on and produce children.
Great,
So,
great,
yeah,
thank you. Great. Okay, so if every cause is a cause of origination, do you need a first member?
If every cause is a cause of its origination,
not cause of
do you
being,
need a first member?
Do you need a first member in an accidentally ordered causal series?
No. I mean, what I wouldn't agree. No.
Okay,
because again, because again,
right.
when we're thinking about because when we're thinking about causation, again, if I go back, I don't want to. The billiard ball example is it happens really fast. That's why it's like a bit of a difficult. But I mean, my whole point is that if we're thinking about causation if we're thinking about at any moment, however long it lasts, 5 seconds, 0.5 seconds, whatever, there's A causes B, right? So A causes B, and then we ask what causes A, and then if what causes A has to, given your PSR becoming, which is that every event has a cause, or I'm sure, I mean, every change has a changer, or so on. There's something that requires a cause for A, and that means that there's something A changes, and that requires something to cause, unless it's purely actual.
Okay, purely actual. I'm not. No. You're smuggling in Aristotelian metaphysics there. That's the point.
Fine. Let me. I don't want to use metaphysically loaded language. Let me say unless either A itself. Okay, let's rephrase it. So, at any moment of the event, A causes B, and then we ask, does A undergo causation itself? If the answer is no, then A requires a cause of itself. And if that's the case,
Squiddy,
then we can go ask again. Would you agree with me so far, or what?
You do want. Okay, let me ask you a question. You're a Catholic. You do know Aquinas believes the universe can be eternal. You don't have arguments that can prove it to be infinite or finite in time.
The universe can be eternal. I'm granting.
Yeah. Okay. But okay. Why? Because temporal series are all accidentally ordered. That's what he's going to say. He's going to sit there and say
no.
Then why does he argue the universe can be eternal?
That conflates simultaneous with instantaneous.
Okay. Yeah. No, but here's the point. Basically, is this. So the reason the universe can be eternal is because when you see a cause happening in time, like one billiard ball striking another, that is part of an accidentally, not essentially ordered causal series.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we got that. So the reason he is saying that the universe, that you need God, is not because it's not like the Kalam where there's an infinite series is impossible. It's because things in this world or things in creation
have derivative causal powers.
Okay, things in this world, again, to go back to that Thomistic argument, which we agreed upon, and let's do that. So we right away agree that it can be infinite time. So the reason why there's a God is not because of the impossibility of an infinite series of temporal events. It's because things in this world are a mix of essence and existence. Their existence does not come from their essence. Therefore, their existence must be donated to them. And therefore, this cannot regress infinitely, because this is essentially...
I don't even have to use it. No, I don't even have to use that. I don't even have to. All I have to say is the reason why we get to it is because there is causation. There's change. At any moment, A causes B. Either A itself undergoes change. Either A itself can be caused or it can't. And if A itself can be caused, then that's all. We already have a hierarchical series. We're thinking
no, because you don't have. Okay, so let's go to this. If your understanding causation is the PSR of becoming, which is just a temporal series, how do you get a hierarchical series from that? Go ahead.
Because you're saying every event. I would phrase it. Would you agree that every change has a change?
No, we're not. We're going to say event has a cause, because we're understanding this. We're understanding this in the PSR of becoming, which basically states, okay, why did this sound happen? Because the person slammed the door. That's it. So we're saying cause and effect. So from that point of view, if we're saying, why did this house come up? Because this person built it. That's it. So from that, from things which I would understand, which are temporal, which are accidentally ordered, derive a hierarchical or essentially ordered causal series from that. Go ahead, Squiddy.
Yeah, because given any series, or any event, I should say, A causes B. At any moment, we can ask what caused A, or what caused B, and if it's A, then what caused A, and if it's something else, either that is going to be itself something which can be caused, which can change, or it's not. And if it's not, then we've already gotten to a first member.
No, hold on. Let's go to this.
We're just going to be pushing the problem back.
Why can't it just be an infinite series of billiard balls striking each other?
Okay, and that's fine. It can, but then if we zoom in on that, and I'm saying if it's an infinite series of billiard balls, there's still some change going on, and whatever the change is, at any moment there has to be something which explains.
Okay, hold on. You know what the
change
change is, Squiddy?
That's my point.
What is the change from according to this transcendental idealist perspective? One billiard ball struck another. The change is its changed location. Its spatial and temporal relations have changed. One billiard ball strikes another. So that's the point. So from those things, the PSR of being, which is spatial and temporal relations, in causation just happening within time, that's it. Like I hear a door, I hear a sound, and the door was slammed. What I'm asking you, so first you agree that you actually couldn't get donated power from spatial and temporal relations. And the second one is just to explain this. If you limit yourself to just what the scholastics would call an accidentally ordered causal series, can you get an essentially ordered causal series from only an accidentally ordered causal series?
From an accidentally ordered causal series, no, but we can derive an essentially ordered causal series from any causation, any change which occurs. And if you grant that change occurs, then that's all I need.
Okay, so here it is. But then you are understanding causation differently than the transcendental idealist. You're not understanding it as this temporal series. You're going to want to smuggle in these Aristotelian presuppositions of act and potency, which is the thing which, again, goes back to the original point. You're inflating being beyond spatial and temporal relations to a mix of act and potency, to also something having a composite of essence and existence, in which existence must be superadded to it.
No, I mean, again, when we're talking about one, I mean, you're saying one event after another. Yeah, you can't get a first member from one event after another, but within that event, which would be an essentially ordered causal series, within that event, you have one thing causing the other at any moment in order to sustain its existence.
But the sustaining existence is presupposing donated power, which is in question. That's the point, Squiddy.
No, I'm not. I'm demonstrating.
No. You okay? Let's go to this again. Okay. So first thing, PSR of being. We experience things spatial and temporal. I look at the tree outside. It has spatial extension. It persists throughout time. Correct?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you agreed that from that alone, you can't get donated power. Correct?
from it just existing, you can't get donated power, or
From its spatial and temporal relations. The PSR of being has to deal with spatial and temporal relations. From its spatial and temporal relations, you cannot obtain donated power.
From its spatial temporal relations, you can't don't. Sure, but I don't believe that's all that's going on.
Okay,
there. So,
well,
I mean,
right away, that would
spatial
basically,
temporal.
okay, that's the thing. So right away, that cuts any argument in half, because if you can't get donated power from its being, because that's the point of an essentially ordered causal series. It's not a cause of its origination, it's a cause of its being.
All right,
So
real fast, that's the initial hour. You have another 20 minutes right now. And if anybody wants to get a super chat in with questions for our guests, you can add up to an additional 40 minutes to the debate if you're enjoying the debate. Also, we're at 44 likes, so I've got 6 pieces of clothing on left. But let's, if you guys have any questions for them, please make sure to consider submitting a super chat. It'll add $1 or a minute for each dollar, up to 40 additional minutes on top of the 20 we have. Oh, we got one more, so 25 minutes right now, additional remaining. I'm going to start that additional timer right now, and we'll start with the audience question. Did God donate the power for people to trip and fall? Thank you so much for the super chat, Nobody on Fire. And then y'all can take back over.
You want me to answer that or what?
Yeah, that's a question.
Well, I know. I just didn't want. You said okay. So yes, because God's the first cause, but things come about through secondary causes. So the power to trip and fall came from God, but then people can use it to do whatever by accident or whatever, right? So it's like if you ask, is God responsible for murder because he's the first cause and we're secondary causes? Well, no, it would be like saying, is a servant responsible for, or is a master responsible for what a servant did when he went and committed murder? No, because he's a secondary cause. So we wouldn't. God isn't responsible for me tripping and falling. We just derive the causal power from God as the first cause, but we're secondary causes. We have our own free will and so on, and we can do whatever we want. So yeah.
Well, my answer to that is the person fell because they tripped. That's what happened. So we're seeing a person that exists in space, and we're seeing something happening through time. When we say, why did he fall? Because he tripped. That was it. I think if you see all this, that's the point. Squiddy has a bloated, inflated metaphysics that just goes beyond what we experience. Go ahead. That's it.
All right, and then y'all just take back over.
Yeah. I don't even know where we left off. I think it was like spatial temporal relations or whatever. You said you can't get the PSR. You can't get donated power from the PSR being. That was your argument.
Yeah, I mean, look, if we can go through this right away. So let's go step by step. So this particular thing exists. The tree exists, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, premise 2. In any created finite thing, there's a distinction between what it is, its essence, and that it is its active existence. So this would be going to the being of things. So from my transcendental ideals perspective, what we immediately experience is space and time, existing spatially or temporally. We don't experience from this. It's not part of the necessary structures of experience such that we experience this distinction between essence and existence. And if that's the case, whatever has essence that is not identical to its active existence does not have existence from itself, which then goes to 4. Whatever does not have existence from itself must receive its existence from another. So it's very important for this Thomistic argument is that you get donated power. And that is not just a cause of its origination, that's a cause of its being. So right away, you would have to say that its very being is such that it has donated power, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, but then you did admit from the PSR of being itself, from the very fact of its being is just spatial and temporal relations. Donated power is something you can obtain from that. There you
go. Well, I mean, if it has an essence and the problem with the PSR of being again is that all you're getting is spatial and temporal relations. From that, and you've admitted you don't get things within mind independent reality. All you're getting are spatial and temporal relations. So I guess from that, sure, maybe I don't think you might not be able to get. Yeah, I don't maybe from the PSR being, I don't think you could get donated power. That would come from something like the principle of causality, or as you would call it, the PSR of becoming, which states that every change has a changer. Nothing goes from potency to act except by something to act. Again, I'm just using potency and act as concepts. I'm not assuming like I don't want to get into. I know you're going to say there's a bunch of metaphysical baggage or whatnot. All I'm saying is, I lost my train of thought. All I'm saying is that from the PSR being every event has a cause, every change has a changer, we get donated power because one thing causes the other, and it must be caused by something else, and either it can't regress infinitely, must be a first member. So from the PSR being or becoming, or as I would say, the PSR, the principle of causality, yes, you do get causal donated power. Each member requires this causal power from the other member. So,
well, and then so obviously agreed we can't get it from being itself. So when we look at causation, and I'm saying this, so causation is happening temporally. So let's kind of understand this. So you, as a Thomist, would agree there's a difference between an accidentally and essentially ordered causal series. And accidentally ordered causal series is a cause of something's origination. So we say a cause of its origination, we understand that in terms of a temporal series. The builder built a house. The cause of its being is not something that, you know, depends upon a temporal series, right?
No. Again, any temporal series when it involves causation, okay, you're going to have any series, any event which involves causation, it will require a cause of its being. That would be an essentially ordered series if it requires a cause at a moment. Like for example, I just want to use an analogy. If like for example, if something is composite, if something at any moment, like for example, it depends on certain things like temperature and so on. It depends on certain things which sustain its existence. And so that's kind of the point. It depends on these various factors at any moment. That's where
okay,
you
it
get the
depends.
okay,
Let's kind of go to this. So the house that's built by the builder, does the builder have to keep constantly holding that house up?
No, but if you're talking about event A, then event B, no.
Okay, great. Event A, event B. If causation is just event A, event B, event C, if that's what it is, if we understand that, no, that's not Humean, that's Schopenhauerian as well. Because the difference between Hume and Schopenhauer is this. So again, I think this is where the problem is. From the transcendental idealist perspective, it's somewhat similar, but the difference is it's not, event B happened after event A. Event B happened because of event A. That's all that's saying. That's the only difference, but it's still temporal.
Okay, but the problem is what you're talking about is completely irrelevant. I'm not sure event A and event B can happen and it can go on infinitely. Sure.
Well, that's it. If it can go on infinitely, that's the point. Yes, great. No, hold on.
No. You're not letting me finish, because if event A occurs, what we're concerned with are the necessary conditions, the necessary sustaining conditions for event A. Any causation which occurs, anything with parts, anything which occurs in time and is caused and changes and so on. If event A occurs at any moment of that change, there requires a cause to sustain it. Otherwise,
Squiddy, that's the point. That's the point. So I'm not. Here's the thing: a sustaining cause. You're saying a cause of its being. This is the point. That's not how causation is understood in this point of view. Causation is just one event follows another. It's not a sustaining cause. That's going back to the concept of donated being, that this requires a sustainer. That's what this is denying. This is denying that. This is basically saying, okay, PSR of being is just spatial and temporal relations. PSR of becoming is just a causal series, one event causing another. It's the PSR of knowing, which is something as a ground. You're saying there has to be a sustainer, in the sense this has to be a ground. So you're applying that structure to causation. That's the point. That's what I've been saying all along.
No.
Not? Okay.
No, I'm not.
Okay, so let me ask you. Let me ask you a question. So we go to this. So let's say you're saying there's a sustainer. So this sustainer is more than just seeing a temporal series, right?
The sustainer is seeing more than just a temporal series.
Okay, so the sustainer is more than just a series of events of A happened, or B happened because of A. It's more than just this, let's say, this causal series of A caused B, B caused C, or C happened because of B, B happened because of A. You're extending more than just that. You're saying, hey, look, it's more than just one billiard ball happened because the other one struck it.
Not exactly.
What are you okay? So
It depends.
Squiddy, okay. So let's look at this. I want to understand your metaphysics here. So all I'm saying is the PSR becoming one billiard ball strikes another, which strikes another. This is what happened. Why did this billiard ball move? Because this one hit it. Why did that one move? Because that one hit it. Very simple. I can explain it simple. Go ahead. What really is under your metaphysics there in that? Explain that.
Because at any given moment when the billiard ball changes or is caused, given even your own presupposition, namely the PSR of becoming, there must be something to account for why that change occurs. Not that you can't get something from nothing. So there must be something which accounts for that change at any given moment, at any moment when that change occurred. We're not focused. We're not concerned with the billiard ball striking.
But that
is
what the principle of causation.
What we're concerned is that when the billiard ball strikes the other ball, however long that takes, what are the causal factors involved? What if billiard ball A causes B? Okay, great, but then A.
Oh, okay, I get it.
A itself changes. A itself changes, and it's
Oh,
caused.
I get it.
So there must be something which changes, and so on, and that goes on.
Squiddy, again, this causation. This is transcendental idealism. So the causation is limited to how your mind is structuring it. You don't have to have this additional metaphysical oomph which you're getting at. So we see the causation is limited to this structuring of A happens because B happened because C. This is what it's limited to in this. You're looking at it, oh, well, obviously there has to be some causal force here, something real, which is just beyond that, which is in there. No, but that's what transcendental idealism is denying from the start. It's just, this is how my mind is structuring it. This is the structuring of it. You're adding in something that just goes beyond the original structuring of experience. You're saying you think there needs to be something kind of deeper under the hood, which is going on here, which is not part of that experience of spatial and temporal relations and just causal relations as far as one event happening after another, one event causing another. That's what's happened. That's what it's denying, Squiddy.
I mean, again, I don't want to repeat myself, but my whole point, I mean, I don't even know what else to say other than what I've already said. But again, I'd give you an analogy, though. Like, for example, if we're talking about a sugar cube melting in tea, right? So we have one event, namely the sugar cube melting in the tea. And then we have someone drinking the tea. And then we have the tea being converted into energy and so on. So yeah, you have one event after the other, right? So you have we have one event that doesn't affect the other event, that doesn't affect the other event. But what we're concerned with are the events themselves. What are the conditions required for causation?
Oh my God, Squiddy, it's a transcendental idealist. The condition is how we structure experience. It's not something which is in itself. It's not some sort of causal power which is unpacking, which is behind
the scenes. You have to demonstrate.
No, I don't have to demonstrate it. No, you have to demonstrate the opposite.
Okay, well then.
You have to demonstrate that it's more than that. That's the point. Okay, this is the thing. You're going beyond what we experience. That's the whole point. That's it in a nutshell. So that's my whole point. I'm saying, okay, first, PSR of being. We experience things spatially and temporally. We don't experience donated power. This is added. When we experience causation, we experience one event happening another because of that. We don't experience this underlying oomph or something that you're wanting to read into that, to sit there and say, well, under the hood, I experience this causal power as having this kind of, let's say, some sort of energy that's going to require a sustainer doing it. That's not in that. That's the point. So these are things that you add on that you have to demonstrate. I'm just starting from experience itself. What are the conditions necessary for experience? You are adding additional metaphysical layers which don't come from that experience. That's it.
Yeah, I'm using your
presuppositions. No, you're not. Okay, then how are you? Okay, so here it is. If you're using my presuppositions, let's understand this. Okay, so you would agree from a scholastic point of view, an accidentally ordered causal series can be infinite, right? But it essentially can't.
Yeah.
So if you don't have anything like an essentially ordered causal series, If all causal series are accidentally ordered, then it being infinite is not a problem, correct?
That question doesn't really make
No,
sense.
it does
I
make
get what
sense.
you're
Okay.
saying. I get what
Can
you're
you
saying,
have an
but
ascent if you do not have, can an accidentally ordered causal series be infinite?
Can it accidentally or essentially?
Accidentally.
Right? Yes.
Okay.
An accidentally ordered causal
Great.
series
If
can be infinite.
if causation is understood as accidentally ordered and not essentially ordered, then there is no problem with it being being infinite, right?
That's an
Accidentally ordered, not essentially ordered. Can it be infinite?
yes.
Okay.
If it's
Great.
accidentally ordered and not essentially ordered, it can be infinite.
Okay, so here's my
Sure.
question. If you have a system which understands causation as what would be more like accidentally ordered, a cause of origination, to use Avicenna, builder builds a house, it's not a cause of its being. Okay, it's a cause of its origination because the cause of origination is temporal. If you understand causation in that way, do you need a first member?
If it's a cause of origination, the problem is any causation.
No, just answer that question.
So, your question is if it involves the cause of origination and not involves a cause of being. Yeah, sure, but again, it must involve a cause.
But that's the point. So here's the thing. According to the transcendental idealist view of causation, which is how we experience it, we experience the PSR of becoming, which are causal relations, one event happening another. All causes are just causes of origination. Well, this happened because this happened prior in time. This happened because this happened prior in time. There is no essentially ordered causal series in that framework. That doesn't even exist because the point of an essentially ordered causal series, it's more of applying the PSR of knowing to the PSR of becoming. And the PSR of knowing is that a judgment has a ground. So that can't regress infinitely. That's the point. I mean, okay, I think we settled this now. So you are basically having to, so you agree, let's put this, that you have to go outside of spatial and temporal relations to get being, number one, right?
To get being, you have to go out
to
of
get
spatial
donated
and temporal
being.
to get donated being. I suppose so.
Okay.
Sure, why not?
Now, if you understand a causal series only as causes of origination, it can be infinite. You don't need a first member, correct?
Again, you're contradicting causation if you say that.
No, not contradicting causation.
Do you
Show me
believe
the
that
logical
something can come from
contradiction in
nothing?
causation. Show me the logical
do you believe
contradiction.
that something? Do you believe that something can come from nothing?
What? That is so irrelevant to the point. So show me the
No,
logical
it's not irrelevant.
contradiction.
Just answer the question.
Because how am I?
Answer the
I'm not
question.
asserting a violation of ex nihilo nihil fit. I'm not
Okay,
doing that
then
at
what I'm
all.
saying is,
I'm not.
at
How am I
any
doing that?
moment-
How
at
am I
any
saying
moment-
something comes from nothing? I'm not saying that.
Okay, I didn't say. I just asked you a question. Okay, so at any moment during any causation, is there something? If A causes B, is there anything which accounts for A at any moment?
If A caused, well, I mean, you could have said that C could have caused A to hit B. So
At any moment, yeah, it accounts for it at any moment. Great. So either C has causation, either C undergoes
I
causation.
wouldn't say any moment. It happened prior temporally.
Or it doesn't. It's uncaused, in which case you already grant a first member, or it itself can be caused, in which case you're just pushing the problem back.
But here,
Yeah.
okay. So the thing is this: I wouldn't agree that it has nothing to do with the contradiction. You are having to extend causation outside of just causes of origination to causes of being to get your system to work. From just causes of origination or an accidentally ordered causal series, you can't get your concept of God, right?
Sure, but again, I've already said that
Right.
any causation requires essentially ordered causal series.
Okay, and this is where I would disagree. This is where I'm saying you're smuggling the PSR of knowing. A judgment has a ground to reinterpret the principle, the PSR of becoming, which is a causal series, which is temporal, a cause of origination, to understand it. Okay, this object has donated power, and if it has donated power, if the thing that gives it power has donated power, this can't regress infinitely. So there has to be a first member, something whose essence is existence. Yeah. So no, these are basically going outside of you're misapplying each version of the PSR here. You're inflating the PSR being, you're inflating being to donated power, and you're taking causation outside of its proper scope, which is temporal, which would be a cause of origination. There's nothing called an essentially ordered causal series. Essentially ordered causal series is just applying the PSR of knowing to reality inappropriately because it grounds judgments. It should not be reified into which something has to have its existence grounded.
I mean, my point is just that if anything is caused, right? Like if you have the stick with the stone, there's something which moves another. There's something that causes it at any moment. If I throw a ball, it's actualized by my hand is actualized by my muscles. It's actualized by my atoms, and so on. Each member occurs simultaneously, again, not instantaneously. And so, if we're thinking about the event itself, each member causing the other at any moment, then that's an essentially ordered causal series, and you get that if you grant causation. That's my point.
You're granting that if you understand causation the way that you do, which is an actualization of potentials. I'm not granting that. No, you are saying that it's actually. Well, no, you are saying that. Okay. Yeah. Usually, an essentially ordered causal series has to deal with either an actualization of potentials, something is actually being given being, or something is being unified. That's different from an accidentally ordered causal series. So, can you please go into what we're talking about when one billiard ball striking another? Where's the essentially ordered causal series there? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I did say actualization. I apologize for that. My point is just I'm not using them as like real metaphysical categories, but I don't want to gaslight. So, secondly, again, with the billiard ball striking another, in any billiard ball hits billiard ball B, and the change occurs for like 0.5 seconds. So at any moment of that event, billiard ball A causes B. Either A itself undergoes causation or it's uncaused. And if it undergoes causation, then either that regresses infinitely or is it the first member. There, I did it.
Okay, so let's understand causation. So causation in this is just a cause of origination. It's a cause of its being.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it is. But that's the point. According to this transcendental idealist outlook, which is the correct one, which starts from experience itself. What you experience when you start out by saying, "I experience spatial and temporal relations." Once that's being, all of these metaphysical add-ons that you have get pushed away. Donated being, act and potency, all of these things are illicit because all you have are spatial and temporal relations. That's what being is. So when you see a causal event happen of one billiard ball striking another, you're basically saying why you have to, I guess causation or the PSR becoming is you have to actually understand reality. And the way the understanding is, okay, this billiard ball struck this one. What's actually happening here is that it's moving. And it's moving is that it had this spatial location at time 1. It now has this spatial location at time 2. So that's what's happening with this change. That's how we're understanding it. We're not understanding it, or we're not seeing it as far as actualization of potentials or all these other things that you're added to it, because that's not allowed. Because once the PSR of being is just spatial or temporal relations, all of these things that what you want to add on are not part of being, because being is just spatial and temporal relations. So causation would just happen within space and time. And if that's the case, they're all causes of origination.
No, again, I don't want to repeat myself or sound like a broken record, but all I'm saying is that if you have causation, any causation which occurs, then you do have a cause of its being. And I've demonstrated this by saying at T1, A caused B, at T2, A caused B, and I'm using, let's say,
okay, I want to understand, because you're not making any sense. I want to, okay, so here it is. You understand. So let's start out. You have being. Being is just spatial and temporal relations, okay? Okay, so I have one billiard ball strike another. When one billiard ball strikes another, why did it move? It moved because that one hit it. So what you actually see happening is this billiard ball has this spatial location at T1 and that spatial location at T2.
Okay, great. At T1, A caused B. Okay. So at T1, now let me ask you, at T1, is A caused? Is there something which causes A?
Bro.
Okay, fast, 45 seconds left, and there's up to 35 additional minutes available in the overtime. So if you guys have questions for them, get those in now before we move into the open panel. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Squiddy, this is the mistake you're making. Causation is temporal in this. Everything is a cause of origination. So even at T1, the reason why that billiard ball moved that one was because something prior to it hit it. That's the point. All of these causes are causes of origination because it's understood within time. Time. That's it. Space, time, and causation. Causation is temporal. If causation is understood to be within time, these objections you bring are irrelevant.
All right, and that is time. So we're going to go ahead and move into the conclusions. I'm going to put up a vote for tonight's master debater. So bear with me. So who is tonight's master debater? Squiddy, Nyklot. All right, get your votes in. Squiddy, you took on the affirmative, so you're going to do your closing statement first, and then we'll have Nyklot go. Let me know when you're ready, Squiddy, and I'll start your timer.
Yeah, this isn't going to take much. I don't really. I mean,
you got 8 minutes.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can start now. All I want to say is, first of all, again, he says I'm tacking on these categories. Well, where do we get this borrowed power, essence, and existence, act, potency from? Experience. Again, it's the fact that we're experiencing these things in the real world. There's a distinction between a thing's essence and its existence. If we understand that I can know everything about this thing's essence without knowing whether or not it exists. And if that's the case, then there's a real distinction between essence and existence. Things can be multiplied. And if things are multiplied, then they're not purely existence, since they're purely existence plus some differentiator, which differentiates these various things. Things can fail to exist. Things are not eternal, and so on. These things prove that there's a real distinction between something's essence and existence. And so I'm not assuming. I'm not just merely tacking on these categories. I'm demonstrating that given what we know. I mean, it just seems like Nyklot is basically just dumping out metaphysics altogether and saying, well, we only stick with experience and nothing else. I mean, it just, I think that's, I think that's absurd. But the second issue that we got into was the issue of, okay, well, causation occurs within time. And I agree. He's conflating something being simultaneous with something being instantaneous. Again, if I move the chair, it takes time for me to move the chair. But as the philosopher W. Norris Clarke says, there's no time between me pushing the chair and the chair being pushed. So to say A and B occur simultaneously is just to say that they're part of the same event, however long that event may be. And this was the example that I gave. At T1, if the event, let's say, took 3 seconds, right? At T1, A caused B. At T2, A caused B. At T3, A caused B. Notice, I'm not saying it's occurring instantaneous. I'm saying it occurs within time. We're just asking at any moment, if we zoom in, what accounts for the change at any given moment. Not saying it takes time. We're saying it takes 3 seconds, but there's something which accounts for it. Notice what Nyklot says. I asked him at T1 during this causation, what is accounting for A being caused? And he said nothing, right? He tried changing the topic and say, oh, well, it was the other prior conditions. That's not what I'm asking about, dude. I'm asking about at any moment. Again, I'm saying it occurs I'm saying it takes 3 seconds, not saying it occurs instantaneously, but within that 3 seconds at T1, what accounts for A being caused? And if there's nothing accounts for A being caused at T1, then either there is no cause and it's just uncaused and there's just nothing which accounts for cause, or A itself is a necessary being. That's really the only two options. Either there's nothing accounts for causation, in which case that goes against Nyklot's own PSR of becoming, or A must be the necessary being. But then obviously a billiard ball is not a necessary being, so that just doesn't work. Final thing, I think the whole thing about, oh, well, all we're experiencing are spatial temporal relations. Again, that makes you, I mean, that's clearly Nyklot being that gets you to skepticism. I mean, if all we're experiencing are space-time in the 12 categories, our mind imposing space-time in 12 categories onto experience, then how do we know? I mean, that's all we're experiencing. We're not getting to the Newman. I know he doesn't want to phrase it like that, but that's essentially what he was saying. He's a transcendental idealist. How do I know I'm not being deceived by an evil demon if I'm not really experiencing causal relations? And I mean, I don't know if that's actually what he seemed to indicate, that things really are caused. But then again, I mean, if we only have phenomenal experience, we're not getting to the things themselves. He said earlier that, oh, well, we're not experiencing mind-independent reality, which is bizarre. I mean, if we're not experiencing mind-independent reality, then again, how do you know you're not being deceived by an evil demon, right? You could, that Cartesian scenario. So I mean, if we're experiencing causation in the real world, if it's not just merely A then B, then things really cause. That's the idea of donated power. One thing, if I move the stick with the stone, the stone is moved by my hand, which the stone is moved by the stick, which is moved by my hand, which is moved by something which has causal power built in. That's the idea of causal power right there. If you deny that, if you say, well, it's just A, then B, we're not really experiencing causation. Again, I don't really know if you want to say that, but then again, it kind of seemed like he did. If you just want to say we're not getting to the things themselves, we're not getting to mind independent reality. Okay, well then maybe we're being deceived. I mean, maybe again, there are all kinds of skeptical scenarios I could bring up. So I think that argument makes Nyklot prone to those skeptical scenarios. And so if we really are experiencing causation in the real world, if we really are experiencing change, composition, contingency, then something must account for change, causation. Even according to Nyklot's own presuppositions, his PSR of becoming, there must be things which account for change. There must be things which account for causation, contingency, composition, and so on. And so either at any given moment, again, not saying it's instantaneous, but at any moment, what accounts for the change, what accounts for these various things, either it's going to be a cause which is purely actual, simple, purely existent, etc. Again, I'm not presupposing these categories. I can demonstrate that, but either it's going to be something which is mutable, something which is composed of parts itself, something which is contingent, or it's going to be something necessary, simple, something which is purely actual, something which is purely existent. In which case, then that's the et hoc omnes intelligere Deum, as Aquinas would say. This everyone calls God. I feel like I've sufficiently demonstrated that. I think Nyklot's objections are fairly weak, but I think we had a good debate. Nyklot did make some, decent points, but I don't think ultimately his arguments are successful. That's all I have to say. Thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for the closing statement. Now, Nyklot, let me know when you're ready, and I'll start your 8 minutes.
Okay, I'm ready. Okay, so
all right, and make sure you guys get your votes in.
Okay, so he actually did admit, he conceded right away that given the PSR of being, spatial and temporal relations, all of the metaphysics that he needs to even get started, donated being, he can't. So this is not something you get from experience, it's something you add on to experience. And so also as far as that's concerned, first of all, how do we even know donated being and not persistence to get to existential inertia? So when we do experience reality, we experience it spatially and temporally. From that, what he needs to get for his argument to even start, can't get, because there is no donated being. There isn't a mix of act and potency. There isn't kind of this unifying power. Nothing of this is actually in spatial and temporal relations. So the thing that he even needs to start out with to get, let's just say, that argument, because again, to quote Avicenna, there's a difference between a cause of origination and a cause of being. It's the cause of its being. Its being is such that it has donated power. It is a mix of act, but none of this is actually obtained from the experience of spatial and temporal relations, so you can't even get that started. That's number one. Right away, can't. Number two is, given that, what is causation from this framework? Causation is what would be equivalent to an accidentally ordered causal series. Because why? Because causation in this framework is known space and time to time. A cause of origination is like the builder building the house. The essentially ordered causal series is a cause of something's being. But since causation is to be understood temporally in this sense, it's going to be equivalent to what the scholastics would have called an accidentally ordered causal series, which can be infinite. Which he agreed with that. He said, yeah, you can have an infinite accidentally ordered causal series right away. And what he dodged the point is when I said that his concept of an essentially ordered causal series requires understanding the PSR of knowing, which is a judgment having its ground, applying that to causation, which is a misapplication of causation. So right away, Squiddy has to come in and completely just mess up our experience. Our experience is one of where we're experiencing things spatially, temporally, and causation, not causation as this sort of, I guess, atemporal factor in which something's being is being held up at all times simultaneously. No, causation is the one billiard ball striking another. If that's the case, then an accidentally ordered causal series is sufficient. So I'm just going to reiterate that. He has to really misunderstand experience. And that's my point. That's why I used to agree with these arguments. I held that people knew I believed in this Neoplatonic argument. But once reading Schopenhauer, it's false. you do have to kind of take experience and kind of mess with it to get these arguments. You do have to stretch being beyond spatial and temporal relations to some sort of just donated being or mix of act and potency, which doesn't come from experience itself. And then you do have to take causation outside of the experience of temporal relations to some sort of, again, God or some reality that exists simultaneously outside of space and time, which is giving existence. That's it. But we don't experience that. That's not part of experience. Causation is experienced temporally. So that would be it. He has to really mess up experience. And once you see those things, the cosmological arguments are just one big trick. It's inflating being from spatial and temporal relations to donated power, and it's taking causation outside of its proper scope, which is to temporal relations, one billiard ball striking another, to something which is giving existence, which is extratemporal, which is outside of space and time, which is nothing that we experience. That's basically it. So yes, I mean, again, this is coming from some person who used to believe in it, but after reading this, this is a trick. These cosmological arguments are really having to have you go beyond what you experience and then take concepts to add it in that are not part of experience. And as I said, if you go beyond experience, why your concept than another? Why can't the atheist just say, oh, well, I don't see donated power or donated being. I see persistence. And if I see persistence, I can get to existential inertia. I don't have to get to donated power to this being whose essence is existence and all that. And you can even see by some of the descriptions, Squiddy was going on this big inflated metaphysics when I said, oh, well, here's the reason why God trip and fall. Someone fell because they were tripped. You see this object in space and in time, something happened, this being tripped and it fell. Quick, easy explanation. You don't have to get to God donated this power of falling. And, what happened is this object, this stick just has this falling power in it. And this person just took in this falling power and fell over. No, all this is just in inflated, bloated metaphysics, which is not part of the original experience. And on that note, I am done.
Thank you so much for your conclusions, you two. So the audience made their vote, and we have a winner. Nyklot won the vote with 69% of the vote out of 16 votes. So congratulations, Nyklot. Squiddy had 31% of the vote. Now, Nyklot, you have tonight's Master Debater title. So congratulations.